These last couple of months have seen an opening up, a return to full-on in-person gatherings. Over the last few weeks, I've stood with thousands of football supporters at the Thatcher's End watching Bristol Rovers. I've been to events like the reopening of the Arts Centre in Colchester and celebrations like a wedding blessing and a family get-together. But along with these things, it is coming together as church, singing, praying, worshipping. It is that I've missed so much. And that church gathering can look so different in different settings. Last weekend, I was in a field at a couple of events organised by the Greenbelt Festival. I love Greenbelt, and our scaled down events last week helped me to identify just what it is that makes the Greenbelt Festival feel so special. I know of nowhere else or nothing else that better reflects the kind of radical inclusion that Jesus talked about and put into practice, a great diversity of people, each welcomed in the totality of who they are, and each celebrated as the unique gift from God that they represent. No one is left out. And then yesterday we had the enthronement, the seating of the new Bishop of Chelmsford, the Right Reverend Gully Francis de Charny. And always at such services you have the gathering of the great and the good, the Lord Lieutenant, the High Sheriff, mayors, civic dignitaries, all in their chains of office. But all sorts of other people would have been part of yesterday's service too, including some that would never describe themselves as being either great or good. At all these gatherings that we call church, there are people who love God and people who want to love him more. There are people with much faith and others who have little. Regular churchgoers and some who've not been for a very long time. There are those who have tried to follow and many who've failed. And yet these expressions of church are each places where the generous hospitality of God and the openness and grace of God's people are wonderfully, wonderfully celebrated. There is so much there about what I think church is about and what today is about. God calls you as you are, and he loves you as you are, not as you should be, because none of us is as we should be. And that is how we welcome and accept other people, without condition, without exception. No matter who they are, no matter what they have done, we make them welcome. Because there are people who don't come to church, who stay away from our church buildings, because they don't think that they're smart enough or good enough or religious enough. They're frightened that they'll be judged, looked down upon, or rejected. And because of that, they stay away. But God has called us to reach out with compassionate love and healing grace to this broken and hurting world, to stretch out our arms of love and to welcome all who come this way. Our gospel reading today features someone who probably didn't think that they were smart enough or good enough or religious enough, someone who might have been frightened of being judged, looked down upon or rejected. But she was also desperate because her daughter was frighteningly ill. Her daughter was possessed by an unclean spirit. So she went in search of Jesus, who at the time was exhausted from his work and desperately needed a rest. So he checked into a friend's house and he tucked himself away in a cool, quiet corner. As far as Jesus was concerned, this was not a day for preaching or for healing. No, this was a rest day, a chance to unwind. But all of a sudden there is this woman kneeling at his feet, begging him to cast the demon out of her daughter. Now, she's a woman and a Gentile to boot. Jesus, according to the culture of the time, should not have even spoken to her. In those days, rabbis, when in public, didn't even talk to female members of their own family. There was even a group of them called bruised and bleeding rabbis, because every time they saw a woman, they closed their eyes with inevitable consequences. Jewish women at that time were looked down upon by Jewish men. But this woman wasn't even Jewish. She was a foreigner, a Gentile. But desperation forces people to cross boundaries. Isn't that one of the things that the current refugee crisis shows us? This woman's daughter had an unclean spirit, a demon, some kind of illness, and she wanted her to be healed. She comes to Jesus perhaps because he's a known miracle worker. He's done this kind of thing before. Maybe he'll do it for her. But Jesus said to her, let the children be fed first. Now the children are Israel. And Jesus is saying that he wasn't sent to deal with the likes of her, a Phoenician woman from Syria. He was sent to Israel, to God's chosen people, to the Jews and not the Gentiles. Now this may sound harsh, but Jesus, I think, was seeking an engagement. He wanted to go deeper. He wanted to relate to this woman in the totality of all that she was. This woman had come to Jesus because she'd heard that he can make sick people well again. But she probably didn't know who he was. She didn't know that he was the Messiah. But by saying that the children should be fed first, Jesus is building up a picture of who he is. He has been sent. He has been sent to Israel. He has been sent to redeem the lost. Jesus is telling her who he is, that he is the Messiah. Now note her response. As she kneels before him, she addresses him as Sir, or more properly, Lord. You see, she recognizes him as the Messiah. Already the engagement is working and she's getting to know who Jesus really is. But before all that, Jesus does something a little unusual. Jesus calls her a dog. Now here's a bit of a blow to political correctness. Jesus, gentle Jesus, meek and mild, calls this woman a dog. Quite reasonably, commentators have attempted a damage limitation exercise on this bit. Some say that Jesus meant it in a diminutive sense, as though to be called a little dog or a puppy is somehow less offensive. Others say that Jesus said it with a smile, that it was part of a witty banter that went on between him and the Gentile woman, as if Jesus and the woman had joined the cast of some Middle Eastern sitcom. Is it too much to suggest that Jesus actually called her a dog? She just interrupted his retreat. After all, she was a Gentile, a woman asking favours from a Jew. Every Jew at the time would have called Gentiles dogs, and every Gentile would have expected to hear that in the eyes of a Jew, even maybe in the eyes of the Messiah, that is what they were, a dog. For what it's worth, I think Jesus probably did call this woman a dog. But I think he did so because he knew in this instance that it would bring about a deepening of their engagement. He wanted to relate to this woman in the totality of all that she was. Often, God confronts us with our fears and our insecurities, not to make us feel worse, but in order that we might overcome them. The woman in our story was intelligent. She was resourceful. She was determined. Jesus could so easily have granted her request. But if he did, then nothing would have been achieved beyond the healing of her daughter. Instead, she is forced to reflect on why she has come. She comes to a point where she recognizes that this man, Jesus, is the Messiah of God, and she kneels down before him and calls him Lord. Then she's taken one stage further in her engagement with God. She believed when she set out that Jesus was just a wonder worker who would either wave a magic wand and heal her daughter, or he would dismiss her. End of story. Having now discovered that Jesus is none other than the Messiah, the next question she must ask herself is, why would the Messiah heal the daughter of someone like her, a woman, a Gentile, in his eyes perhaps no more than a dog? And this is where she discovers faith. If her daughter was to be healed, then it wouldn't have been because she shouted at the disciples or pleaded with their master, or even that she'd outsmarted them with her stunning wit and repartee. If her daughter was to be healed, then it would be because God's generous love was able to extend to one such as her. She may just be a dog to him, but she believed, she had faith. She knew that even dogs get something. It is a remarkable encounter because not only does this woman recognize that Jesus is Lord, but she also sees that his love, his compassion, the compass of God's saving purposes will extend beyond Israel to the Gentiles, to those once considered to be outsiders. What happened to her is amazing. And everywhere the gospel is preached, her story is told. For it is a story of someone who probably didn't think that they were smart enough or good enough or religious enough. Someone who might have been frightened of being judged, looked down upon or rejected. But someone who learnt that Jesus' love and his compassion extended even to her. Come as you are, says Jesus, to you. Come, for you are welcome, you are accepted, and you are loved, not just by me or the church, but by God. For God's arms are always open wide, ready to welcome, ready to embrace. Today's gospel reading goes on to outline another incident in which Jesus healed someone, a deaf man, who had a speech impediment. It's one of just a few occasions in which we come across the original Aramaic word that Jesus used instead of it being translated into the Greek, along with Jesus' use of words like Abba, Talitha cum, and Eloi, Eloi lama sabachthani. The word Ephatha, used by Jesus as he heals the deaf man, somehow conveys the power behind the original utterance. Here was a word that erupted from the very core of Jesus, fueled by the huge emotion and deep compassion that Jesus felt for this man. Ephatha, be opened. This poor man, being deaf and unable to speak, had been forced to live a life isolated from the community, cut off, unable to hear others or to speak with them. You see, it wasn't just lepers who were treated as lepers at the time of Jesus. Women, Gentiles, the deaf, the mute, the blind were all subject to prejudice and treated as other. But along comes Jesus, who they describe as a friend of tax collectors and sinners. He reclines at tables with the amharets, with the outcasts, the rejected, the unclean. Jesus would play no part in the apartheid that existed back then. He heals the daughter of a Gentile woman, and he shares with her something of his identity, moving her from despair to faith. He heals a deaf man with a speech impediment, restoring him to society and ending years of social isolation. And he whispers his prayer, which I believe is his prayer for the church, for us in our dealings with others, for our gatherings in whatever form they take. Jesus prays, Ephatha, be opened. Be open to all who come your way. Be open to those who feel marginalised and excluded by others. Be open to all to whom God may be extending an invitation. Come as you are, says Jesus. Come, for you are welcome. You're accepted and you are loved. For God's arms are always open wide, ready to welcome, ready to embrace. Amen.